Greetings! Mantare79 here, and I'm back with another deck profile video for the Cardfight Vanguard trading card game. In today's video, the deck profile I'm going to be doing one for is D standard formats, Dragon Empires, Dragonic Overlord with Thundering Cannon Dragon Salvorex. Alrighty then, let's get started. And now for the ride deck. For the cards in this ride deck, we have Grade 0, Lizard Runner Undu, Grade 1, Embodiment of Armor Bar, Grade 2, Dragonite Nehalem, and Grade 3, Dragonic Overlord. The Grade 0 starting unit, Lizard Runner Undu. Like any other starting unit in the D standard format, he features only one skill. When written on top of, if you're the second to go to Grade 1, you get to draw a card. The Grade 1, Embodiment of Armor Bar. His skills are, the first skill, as a Vanguard, when written on top of by Dragonite Nehalem, by paying a counter blast of 1, if the cost has been paid, you may search your deck for any Grade 1 unit and add it to your hand. So ideally, this first skill will allow you to add maybe a Perfect Guard or any other Grade 1 that's mainly used for your deck's later game strategy. The Grade 2, Dragonite Nehalem. His skills are, the first skill, when written on top of by an Overlord, you may move Nehalem from your soul to the rear guard. So if this first skill, as long as you manage to ride an Overlord like Dragonic Overlord or Dragonic over the end on top of Nehalem, you'll be able to secure yourself a rear guard Nehalem whose second skill will support your Vanguard Overlord later in the game. The Grade 3, Dragonic Overlord. His skills are, the first skill, as a Vanguard or a rear guard, whenever it attacks an opponent's rear guard, the attack cannot be blocked by your opponent with any cards in their hand. So with this first skill, you can more or less have a almost absolute attack on any opponent's rear guard, since your opponent cannot use any cards from their hand to guard with. And the second skill of Dragonic Overlord, as a Vanguard, once per turn, after this unit's attack hits, you may counter blast 1 and discard a card from your hand. If the cost has been paid, you may restand your Vanguard Overlord with the additional cost of reducing your Vanguard's drive check by 1. So with this second skill, it's more or less a standard restanding ability for the Dragonic Overlord series. And with that, we've just about covered the deck's ride deck. Next, let's get on to the main deck. And now for the main deck. For the main deck, let's start off with the Grade 1 lineup. For the Grade 1s of this deck, we have 3. Dual Electros Dragon, 2. Stealth Dragon, Kizan Reiji, 3. Twin Buckler Dragons, and 1. Blitz Order, Elementaria Sanctitude. The Grade 1, Dual Electros Dragon. Its skill is continuous as a rear guard. During your turn, if your opponent's Vanguard is Grade 3 or greater, this unit gets plus 5,000 power. So for Dual Electros Dragon, he more or less acts as a stable 13,000 power attacker for your front row or 13,000 power booster from your back row. And the best part is this skill does not cost anything to activate. It merely needs to have your opponent be at Grade 3 or higher, making it a very stable and useful card to have in a late game if you want to maintain a decent level of power to attack your opponent with. The Grade 1, Stealth Dragon, Kizan Reiji. Its skill is, as a rear guard, once per turn, you can counter blast 1 and soul blast 1. If the cost has been paid, you may choose one of your opponent's rear guards in the same column as this unit and retire it. So for Kizan Reiji, as long as you manage to keep him safely tucked away in the back row of your left or right column, as long as you don't mind paying the counter blast 1 and soul blast 1, you'll have a secure rear guard to help you retire any of your opponent's rear guards in the same column as this unit, allowing you to clear out your opponent's field to either weaken their attacks or to make your own attacks more easier to hit. The Great One, Twin Buckler Dragon, Sentinel, Perfect Guard. Its skill is, like any other Perfect Guard in the Cardfight Vanguard trading card game, it features the same effect and activation. When used to guard with, you may discard one card from your hand. If the cost isn't paid, then the attack to this unit's blocking is more or less completely guarded against. But it also features another ability. When used to guard with, if you have less than 2 cards in hand, you may more or less activate the Perfect Guard without having to use the usual discard 1 card from hand. So as a last resort, the second ability of Twin Buckler makes it like a last defense against any opponents when you have very few cards in hand, allowing you to survive to your next turn. The Great One, Blitz Order, Elementaria Sanctitude. Its skill is, if your opponent's Vanguard is triple drive, and if the ability can be played without paying the cost, the skill is, when you guard against an opponent's grade 3 or less Vanguard, you may discard 1 card from your hand, and if you do, it more or less activates a Perfect Guard, just like Twin Buckler Dragon. And the best part is, just like Twin Buckler Dragon, it has an additional ability that lets it be played at no cost. If your opponent attacks you with a Vanguard that possesses the triple drive, then you can play this card for no cost, making it a Perfect Guard for opponents who play grade 4s or any other drive +1 abilities. And with that, we just about covered the deck's Grade 1 lineup. Next, let's get on to the Grade 2 lineup. And now for the Grade 2 lineup. For the Grade 2s of this deck, we have 3 Perfect Burn Dragon, 3 Meteor Flare Dragon, 4 Berserk Dragons, and 4 Steel Bullet Duststorm, Ethan. The Grade 2 Perfect Burner Dragon. Its skill is, during your turn, when discarded from your hand during the battle phase, you may instead place Perfect Burner into your Vanguard Soul and choose one of your units, and it gets plus 5,000 power until the end of the battle. So if you play any skills that require you to discard any cards from your hand during the battle phase, if you're lucky enough to have a Perfect Burner in your hand and use it to pay for the cost, not only can Perfect Burner restock your Vanguard Soul for later Soul Blast, but one of your other units in your field, perhaps your Vanguard or other rear guards, will get an additional 5,000 power boost, making Perfect Burner Dragon a great card to have in your hand when it's time to pay for any discard from hand costs. The Grade 2 Meteor Flare Dragon. Its skills are, the first skill, when this unit is placed on the rear guard circle until the end of the turn, all of your opponent's rear guards lose all of their continuous abilities and cannot gain them. And also another ability, you may counterblast 1 and choose one of your opponent's rear guards in the same column as this unit and retire it. So for the first skill of Meteor Flare, it's a pretty powerful skill. Just by simply being called, your opponent's rear guards lose their continuous abilities, for example like the resist ability. And also you can retire one of your opponent's rear guards, making the first skill a very powerful unit to have if you wish to nullify your opponent's skills or to wipe out their rear guards. And the second skill of Meteor Flare Dragon, as a rear guard, during your turn, if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or higher and if they have no rear guards, this unit gets plus 10,000 power. So this more or less works well with the first skill of Meteor Flare, as long as you manage to wipe out your opponent's rear guards beforehand, and if your opponent's already at grade 3 or higher, by the time you use Meteor Flare to attack, he can serve as a 20,000 power attacker all on his own. So thus making Meteor Flare Dragon a great card to not only nullify your opponent's rear guard skills and to retire their rear guards, but also making a very powerful attacker by himself. The Grade 2 Berserk Dragon. Its skill is, as a rear guard, when this unit attacks, if your Vanguard is an Overlord, then he gets plus 5,000 power until the end of battle. An additional ability, by counterblasting 1, if the cost isn't paid, you may retire one of your opponent's grade 2 or less rear guards. So for Berserk Dragon, it's more or less a support card for the Dragonic Overlords. But by the time he attacks, as long as you manage to get an Overlord in your Vanguard, as long as you don't mind paying 1 counterblast, you can clear your opponent's field. But also he can serve as a 15,000 power attacker from the front row. So just like the Meteor Flare Dragon, Berserk Dragon is a good card to attack with or to clear out your opponent's field of rear guards. The grade 2, Steel Bullet Duststorm, Ethan. Its skill is, as a rear guard, when your Vanguard's attack hits, you may retreat Ethan from your own rear guard. If the cost is paid, you can draw 1 card and countercharge 1. So as for Ethan, he's a good way to restock your hand and also to refund your counterblast by countercharging. By my opinion, he's like an improved version of the Grade 1 Dragon Monk Gojo D standard format. Since unlike Dragon Monk Gojo, he doesn't have to be in any specific area like behind the Vanguard. You can simply call him in any rearguard circle, and as long as your Vanguard's attack hits either their rearguards or their Vanguard, you'll be able to use Ethan's skill and restock your hand by drawing 1 and countercharging, thus making Ethan a good card to have to preserve your counterblast and also to increase your defense or offensive options by drawing more cards. And with that, we just about covered the deck's Grade 2 lineup. Next, let's get on to the Grade 3 lineup. And now for the Grade 3 lineup. For the Grade 3s of this deck, we have 3 Dragonic Overlords and 4 Thundering Cannon Dragon Salvorex. The Grade 3 Dragonic Overlord, the main Grade 3 to ride in this deck, but since I already revealed this unit's skills when explaining the ride deck, let's just skip ahead and get on to the other Grade 3. The Grade 3 Thundering Cannon Dragon Salvorex, one of the main Grade 3s to use in this deck. Its skill is continuous. As a rear guard during your turn, it gets plus 10,000 power, and if your opponent has a front row rear guard, this unit cannot attack the Vanguard. So as for its skill, it's a very powerful skill since you can have a 23,000 power attacker from your front row. As long as you've managed to clear your opponent's front row rear guards beforehand, you'll be able to have a decent front row attacker with the Thundering Cannon Dragon Salvorex. And with that, we just about covered the deck's Grade 3 lineup. Next, let's get on to the trigger lineup. And now for the trigger lineup. For the triggers in this deck, we have 1 Dragon Deity King of Resurgence, Dragvita, over trigger. 4 Burning Flail Dragons, critical triggers. 4 Blazing Dual Monk, Sogyo, critical triggers. 3 Flare Veil Dragons, draw triggers. 2 Stealth Fiend Amaviras, heal triggers. And 2 Cure Flare Draco Kids, heal triggers. Grade 0 Dragon Deity King of Resurgence, Dragvita, over trigger. Its skill is, like any other over trigger, when revealed in a drive check or damage check, by removing this card from play, you can draw 1 card and give 1 unit on your field 100 million power. But there's also an additional ability for Dragvita. When revealed during a drive check, you can also stand one of your Vanguards. So this over trigger is more or less specialized for giving your Dragon Empire Vanguard an additional attack by restanding it, making it a good card to use with the Overlord series. The Grade 0 Burning Flail Dragon, critical trigger. Its skill is, as a rear guard, after the battle where it boosted, you may move Burning Flail from your rear guard to your soul. If the cost has been paid, you may give 1 unit on your field plus 2,000 power till the end of the turn. So with this skill, Burning Flail is a good way to not only give one of your remaining units like your Vanguard or Rearguard additional power, but to also restock your Vanguard Soul for later Soul Blast costs. The Grade 0 Flare Veil Dragon, draw trigger. Its skill is, when used to guard with, if your Vanguard is at Grade 3 or more, then it gets plus 5,000 shield until the end of the turn. So with this draw trigger, Burning Flail can serve as a 10,000 point shield as long as you get to Grade 3, making it a decent defense despite having only 5,000 base. Its skill will make it more powerful in the defensive wise. The grade 0, Stealth Fiend Amavira, heal trigger, counter heal. Its skill is, when used to guard against an attack that a unit that has attacked twice or more in the turn, she gets plus 15,000 shield until the end of the battle. So for example, if you use her to guard against a Vanguard or rear guard that has attacked after restanding, she becomes a 25,000 point shield, making her a good way to guard against units that specialize in restanding their Vanguards or rear guards. The grade 0, Cure Flare Draco Kit, heal trigger, heal guardian. Its skill is, when used to guard against an attack whose critical was risen to 2 or more, not by base critical or drive triggers, then he gets plus 15,000 shield until the end of the battle. So for Cure Flare, he's a good way to guard against units like the Vanguard or Rear Guard that powers up its critical by skill or card effects. But like I said before, it only works against skill and card effects, meaning criticals that have risen by base critical or by drive triggers will not be counted for this skill. And with that just about covers the deck's trigger lineup. For the triggers in this deck, we have 1 over trigger, 8 critical triggers, 3 draw triggers, and 4 heal triggers. And now, after having just explained the deck's build and card effects, let's get on to explain the deck's main playstyle. So for the main playstyle of this deck, first you just normally ride from your right deck up until grade 3, the Dragonic Overlord. And then in your front row, try to secure at least 1, or if you're lucky to be able to, 2 Thundering Cannon Dragon Salvorexes. And in your back row, try to secure 1 Stealth Dragon Kizan Reiji in either your left or right back row rearguard circles, and also Dual Electros Dragon either in your center or left right rearguard circles, as long as if you want to have the additional power. And in your front row, in case you cannot secure 2 Salvorexes, you can choose either a Berserk Dragon or Meteor Flare Dragon. And then when it's time to enter the battle phase, simply attack first with your Dragonic Overlord onto your opponent's rear guards, use its skill to restand, and then, as long as you've used either Kizan Reijis, Berserk Dragons, or Meteor Flare Dragons skills to retire your opponent's other front row rear guard, with your opponent's front row completely clear of rear guards, you'll be able to attack your opponent with the 2 Salvorexes with their additional 10,000 power from their own skill. So yep, that's pretty much the main playstyle of this deck. Ride until Dragonic Overlord. Try to secure at least 1 or 2 Salvorexes in your front row. Have either Dual Electros Dragon to boost your Vanguard or one of your Salvorexes. And have 1 Kizan Reiji in either your left or right back rows. In the main phase, try to use Kizan Reiji's skill to retire one of your opponent's front row rear guards. And when it's time to enter the battle phase, use Dragonic Overlord to attack your opponent's other remaining front row with its second skill that's more or less secures you a absolutely unstoppable attack on the opponent's rear guard. After that, restand your Vanguard, and with no rear guards in your opponent's front row, Salvorex with its own skill of plus 10,000 power to itself can attack your opponent's Vanguard, thus allowing you to have more or less a very powerful front row to attack your opponent with, to either pressure them into using up more cards or to ending them with a huge amount of powerful attacks. And with that, we just about covered the deck's main playstyle. And with that, I've just about pretty much covered the deck's main deck build, the card effects, and the main playstyle meant to be used with this deck. So first off, I want to say thank you to the viewers for watching today's video, and to please stay tuned for more videos I plan to upload again in the near future. I also hope you all show your support by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing to my videos and channel. And with that, I say goodbye and see you all soon.